2 days before our cross-country road trip. The one we'd been planning for months, the one my stepfather called his final gift before I moved away for grad school. I stood alone in the garage, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out, my left forearm already blooming purple where his ring had split the skin. The late afternoon sun cut through the dusty windows in sharp golden bars, illuminating flecks of pollen and motor oil suspended in the air, almost beautiful if you didn't know what had just happened. I leaned against the cold hood of the SUV, still warm from his furious exit, and with trembling fingers, I opened the folder on my phone labeled Maple Trip, Backup. I tapped the most recent file, recorded just 23 minutes earlier, and watched again as the dashcam captured everything. His voice low and venomous, my own too quiet, too polite, asking if we could skip the detour to his brother's house because I had an anxiety flare-up. Then the shove, not theatrical, not dramatic, just efficient, brutal, and precise, the kind of violence that only happens when someone knows they won't be held accountable. He'd always been careful like that, never left marks in visible places, never raised his voice loud enough for neighbors to hear. To the outside world, teachers, coworkers, even my own relatives, he was the disciplinarian, old school, just protective of his daughter. But I wasn't his daughter. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. And yet, for nearly a decade, I'd swallowed every excuse, every gaslit revision of reality, because leaving felt impossible and speaking up felt dangerous. But this time was different. Because this time I had proof that couldn't be twisted. The dashcam installed 6 months ago at my late mother's best friend's suggestion, just in case, had been running the whole time, tucked discreetly behind the rearview mirror, its red recording light unnoticed in the dim garage. And now, as I stood there breathing through the dizziness, I did something I'd never done before. I didn't hide it. I didn't delete it. I pressed share, then upload, and sent the file to a secure cloud folder with 2-step verification. Then I texted the link to my attorney. Yes, I'd quietly retained one 3 weeks prior, after the 3rd incident that month, and added a single line. This is why I need the emergency affidavit expedited. I didn't cry, not yet. There. Be time for that later, in the shower with the water scalding hot so no one would hear. Right now, something colder and sharper was rising in me, not rage, not revenge, but resolve. The kind that comes when you realize you've been waiting for permission to protect yourself, and that permission only ever comes from within. I looked down at my reflection in the SUV's glossy paint, pale face, swollen lip, eyes wide with shock but steady, and whispered the words I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times but never dared say aloud. This house is not yours to control. This body is not yours to break. And this trip is not happening. And then, because I knew the performance wasn't over, I smoothed my hair, wiped the blood from my chin with the hem of my shirt, and walked back into the house like nothing had happened. Because the real power wasn't in the violence he'd shown. It was in the silence I was about to shatter, quietly, lawfully, and with receipts. For most of my life, I believed the problem was me, that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too quick to take things the wrong way. Every time my stepfather's voice dropped an octave, every time his hand accidentally clipped my shoulder in the hallway, every time he called my boundaries disrespect, I folded inward, convinced I was misreading the room. After all, everyone else saw him as steady, reliable, the man who fixed the neighbors' gutters and brought casseroles when someone was sick. How could the same hands that held a casserole dish also leave bruises shaped like knuckles on my upper arm? It didn't compute, until I learned that abuse doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and it counts on you doubting your own ears. But hear what changed. I stopped waiting for someone else to name what was happening. I started keeping records, not out of paranoia but out of self-preservation. A photo of a torn shirt, a time-stamped journal entry, a screenshot of a text that said, "You're lucky I don't say what I really think in front of your friends." Small things, maybe. But together, they formed a pattern too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. And that pattern gave me something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. Not anger, not yet, but the quiet certainty that I wasn't crazy, that my discomfort wasn't imagined, that my body's flinch when he walked into a room wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. So if you're watching this and you've ever been told, "He's family, he'd never hurt you," or "You're overreacting," or "It's not that bad, I see you." And more than that, I believe you, even if no one else does yet, even if the evidence feels flimsy in your hands. Because the truth is, harm doesn't need an audience to be real, but sometimes it needs documentation to be believed. And if this story resonates, if it stirs something in you that's been buried under years of "maybe I'm wrong," I want you to do something small but powerful. Drop a stop sign in the comments below. Not for me, for the person scrolling in silence right now, wondering if they're alone. Your one symbol could be the lifeline that tells them, you're not imagining it, and you don't have to stay. This isn't about tearing someone down. It's about building a case, not with fury, but with facts. Not with chaos, but with calm. Because the most terrifying thing to someone who thrives on control isn't your rage, it's your refusal to disappear. And from this moment on, I wasn't disappearing. I was documenting. And I was preparing to leave, not just the house, but the narrative he'd written for me. The road trip was supposed to be his grand finale of ownership, but I had other plans. Quiet ones, lawful ones, and they began with a single question I finally let myself ask. What if I choose myself? The SUV sat in the driveway like a monument to normalcy, waxed to a high shine, roof rack secured, rear windows tinted just enough to obscure the interior from prying eyes. To anyone passing by on Cedar Lane, it looked like any other family preparing for a summer adventure. Coolers stacked by the garage, trail maps pinned to the fridge, a handwritten itinerary taped beside the door. Even the license plate frame read "Adventure Awaits" in cheerful script. But inside that gleaming metal shell, something far darker had already taken root. The air still held the faint scent of his cologne, something sharp and woodsy he always wore when he wanted to seem put together, mixed with the metallic tang of my blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek during the shove. I hadn't cleaned the garage yet. I didn't want to. I needed to walk past that spot every time I opened the door and remember, this is where I decided to stop lying to myself. Grandma Ruth had insisted on the dashcam. "Not because I don't trust you, sweetheart," she'd said last fall, her hands trembling slightly as she handed me the box during one of her rare visits. "But because the world doesn't always trust young women when they say they've been hurt. Give them something they can't unsee." At the time, I'd smiled politely, humoring her like I did with her herbal remedies and warnings about men who speak too softly. I installed it more out of obligation than strategy, just a small black rectangle behind the rearview mirror, blinking its tiny red eye like a silent sentinel. I never imagined it would capture the exact moment my stepfather crossed from strict into dangerous. But there it was, cold, unblinking, impartial. No emotion, no agenda, just time, light, sound, and motion. The ultimate witness. Our home had always been a study in contrasts. Sun-dappled porches hiding locked medicine cabinets. Warm apple pie filling the kitchen while icy silence filled the dining room. Family photos on the wall showing us smiling at Christmas, none of them showing the nights I sat in my car in the driveway just to breathe without feeling watched. The motif of the dashboard screen became a symbol of that duality, the polished surface versus the hidden truth. From the outside, the trip looked like generosity. He was driving me 1,200 miles to my new apartment near campus, covering gas and hotels, making sure I got settled. But the fine print of his kindness always came with strings so thin they were nearly invisible until they tightened around your throat. "You'll call every night. No male friends in your new place. You'll check in before making any decisions." It wasn't care. It was containment. And the dash cam, that small, unassuming device, had just given me the key to unlock it. I ran my fingers over the cool glass of the SUV's window, watching my breath fog the surface for a second before vanishing. 2 days. That's all that stood between me and a 3-week journey trapped in a metal box with a man who just proven he saw my body as something to control, not protect. But as I stood there, something shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. A quiet, steely awareness, because the dashcam didn't just record violence, it recorded location. Time, audio clarity, metadata. And in a world that demands receipts before it grants belief, those details weren't just helpful, they were revolutionary. I turned away from the car, the sun warming my back, and walked inside, not as the girl who'd been pushed into the wall, but as the woman who now held evidence in her pocket and a plan in her bones. The road trip hadn't even started, but the real journey, the one toward freedom, already had. He never signed adoption papers. Legally, I wasn't his. But from the moment my mother married him when I was 13, he treated me like his property, something acquired in the deal, like the house or the old piano in the living room. At first, it was subtle. A hand on my shoulder that lingered too long, a voice that dropped to a growl when I questioned his rules, a look that said, "You don't get to decide what's okay for you." By the time I turned 18, the boundaries had eroded so completely I couldn't tell where my autonomy ended and his control began. He managed my bank account under the guise of teaching responsibility, reviewed my class schedules to ensure I wasn't overextending, and once canceled a job interview because the manager was male and it didn't look appropriate. I let it happen, not because I agreed, but because every time I pushed back, he'd sigh and say, "After everything I've done for you." As if love were a debt I could never repay. The road trip was his masterpiece of manipulation, a grand, public gesture designed to look like generosity while tightening his grip one last time. "It's the least I can do," he'd told relatives, voice thick with faux humility. "She's my daughter in every way that matters." And they'd beam, nodding, never noticing how I stiffened at the word daughter, how I avoided his eyes during family dinners, how I always sat farthest from him on the couch. He'd planned the route meticulously, 7 states, 17 stops, all at motels where he'd pre-booked a single room to save money. No friends invited, no side trips, just him and me, alone in a car for 12 hours a day with no witnesses and no escape. He called it bonding. I called it a cage on wheels. What he didn't know was that I'd already been accepted into a graduate program 2 states away, a program with full funding, housing, and a campus safety protocol that included escort services and emergency housing. It was my lifeline, my first real chance to breathe without his shadow pressing down on me. But he'd found out anyway, through a harmless check of my email when I'd left my laptop open, and his mood had turned icy. "You think you're too good for us now," he'd muttered, not looking up from his newspaper. From that moment on, the trip became less about helping me move and more about reasserting his dominance. He started referencing how ungrateful I'd become, how risky my field of study was, how lonely my mother would have been if she saw me running off like this. The emotional pressure was constant, suffocating, the kind that makes you question whether freedom is worth the guilt. And then came the shove, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I dared to ask a simple question. "Can we skip Uncle Dale's house? I'm not feeling well." That was all it took. One moment I was standing by the garage fridge grabbing water, the next I was pinned against the cinderblock wall, his forearm across my collarbone, his voice a low snarl. "You don't get to change the plan, not after I've arranged everything." The violence wasn't about anger, it was about ownership. A reminder that my body, my time, my very presence on that trip belonged to him. What was at stake wasn't just physical safety, it was my future. If I got into that car, I knew I might not make it to grad school at all. He'd find a way to accidentally miss a turn, to discover a mechanical issue, to convince me I wasn't ready. And I might have believed him, again, if not for the red light blinking steadily on the dashcam. That tiny dot of light was the first thing in years that didn't bend to his will. And in that moment, I realized I didn't have to either. The morning after the shove, I woke before dawn with my jaw clenched so tight it ached, and my forearm throbbing beneath a makeshift ice pack made from a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not my friends, not my sister, not even my roommate who'd texted "good morning" with a sunflower emoji. Who would believe me? He'd charmed teachers, pastors, even the PTA president. My word against his reputation was a losing battle I'd fought in my head 100 times before. But this time, I had the dashcam footage, and I needed someone who'd seen him up close for decades to help me turn evidence into credibility. So I got in my car, left a note on the kitchen counter saying I'd gone for a drive to clear my head, and drove the 20 miles to Maple Grove Estates, where Mrs. Langley lived in a sunlit cottage at the end of a quiet lane lined with lavender and bird feeders. I hadn't seen her much since Mom passed. Life, distance, and my stepfather's quiet campaign of "she's getting on, no need to burden her with our problems" had kept us apart. But Mrs. Langley had been my mother's confidant for over 30 years, the woman who held her hand during chemo, who hosted baby showers, who knew which fights were worth picking and which silences meant surrender. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already waiting on the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl despite the summer heat, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She took one look at my swollen lip and the way I held my left arm slightly bent, and without a word opened the screen door wider. "Come in, Alina," she said, voice steady as river stone. "I've been expecting you." Inside, the house smelled of chamomile tea and old books. She sat me at the kitchen table, poured 2 cups, and then simply waited. No probing questions. No, "Are you sure?" Just space, something I hadn't been given in years. And in that quiet, I unraveled. I told her about the control, the isolation, the way he twisted kindness into obligation. I showed her the Dashcam clip on my phone. She watched it twice, once with sound, once without, her face unreadable. When it ended, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was thin, veined, but her grip was firm. "I saw him do the same thing to your mother," she said quietly. Not the pushing, never that, but the look in his eyes when she wanted to go back to school, that same coldness, like her dreams were an inconvenience. She paused, then added, "I signed as witness on a letter your mother wrote in 2016. It said, if anything happens to me, Alina's safety comes before Richard's comfort. We never filed it anywhere official, but I kept it." Then she did something that changed everything. She pulled out her own phone, a clunky flip model she'd refused to upgrade, and called her old colleague, Miriam Cho, a retired family court mediator who still consulted on custody and elder abuse cases. "Miriam," she said, voice crisp with authority, "I need you to verify a digital file and notarize a statement of witness recollection. Yes, today." She turned to me. "Bring your phone, your Dashcam SD card if you have it, and your medical photos. We're not just believing you, Alina. We're documenting you." In that moment, I didn't just feel believed, I felt anchored. Mrs. Langley's validation wasn't emotional support alone, it was evidentiary scaffolding. She knew how the system worked, who to call, what language would hold up in a deposition. And more than that, she knew him, the mask he wore in public, the cracks beneath it. While the rest of the family saw a good man under stress, she saw the pattern. And when she placed her notary seal on a sworn affidavit 3 hours later, attesting that she'd observed my injuries, reviewed the footage, and confirmed the timeline, she didn't just give me comfort. She gave me a weapon wrapped in dignity. From then on, I wasn't just a traumatized young woman with a video. I was a claimant with an elder ally, and that made all the difference. I'd always assumed that the Dashcam video, the raw, unedited footage of his forearms slamming me into the garage wall, would be enough. But after my visit with Mrs. Langley, she handed me a truth I hadn't wanted to face. Evidence isn't just what happened. It's proving it happened exactly as you say, without gaps they can exploit. So that evening, while the house was quiet and my stepfather watched the news in the den, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a legal pad covered in scribbled timelines, and a steaming mug of tea I kept forgetting to drink. The emotional weight of the footage was undeniable. But in a courtroom, in a bank, in a custody review, emotion gets dismissed as hysteria unless it's anchored in verifiable data. I needed receipts that could stand on their own, even if I never spoke another word. The first wasn't the video itself. It was the paper trail that proved the video couldn't be faked. I dug through the glove compartment until I found the original installation invoice from Clearview Auto Electronics, dated March 12, 6 months prior. It listed the Dashcam model, the technician's name, and crucially, a service note. Device calibrated to GPS and internal clock, no user-accessible editing functions. I scanned it, then called the shop. The owner, a soft-spoken man named Hector, remembered me. He'd installed it while I waited in the lobby, fidgeting with my phone. "Yeah, you said your grandma insisted," he recalled. "We logged the serial number in our system and synced it to your VIN. Tampering would have triggered a system alert." I requested a certified copy of the service record, and he emailed it within the hour, stamped with the shop's official seal. Next, I pulled the metadata from the Dashcam file itself: date, time, GPS coordinates, duration. The incident occurred at 4:22 p.m. on June 18th. The vehicle's GPS showed it was stationary at our home address, debunking any future claim that this was road rage or a misunderstanding during travel. I cross-referenced that timestamp with my own phone. A photo I'd taken of my reflection in the bathroom mirror just after the incident, showing the fresh bruising, was time-stamped 4. 3:31 p.m. my banking app showed a $3.75 coffee purchase at 3:45 p.m. geolocated 2 miles away, proving I hadn't been home long before the altercation. Every detail interlocked like gears in a clock. But the most damning proof came from the Dashcam's internal logs. Modern devices like this don't just record video, they log system events. Using a forensic viewer recommended by Mrs. Langley's contact, I saw that the camera had been in continuous recording mode since 4:00 p.m. with no interruptions, no resets, no file alterations. The red recording light hadn't blinked out for even a second. That meant the clip wasn't spliced. It wasn't staged. It was a seamless, unbroken account of real-time violence. I compiled everything into a single encrypted folder. The service invoice, the GPS log, the photo timestamp, the metadata report, and the original video file with its hash verification code. Then I did 3 things. First, I emailed the entire package to my attorney, who replied within minutes. "This is solid. I'm filing for an emergency civil standby order tomorrow." Second, I uploaded a backup to a secure cloud vault with 2-factor authentication and a dead man's switch. If I didn't disable it within 48 hours, it would auto-send the files to 3 trusted contacts, including Mrs. Langley and campus security. Third, I printed a hard copy, sealed it in a manila envelope, and dropped it in a safe deposit box I'd opened under my maiden name, the one he never knew existed. As I locked the box and walked out of the bank, the late sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, deeper, the relief of knowing that even if no one ever believed me, the truth had been preserved. The receipts weren't just proof for others, they were armor for me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel fragile. I felt fortified. But I also knew this wasn't the end. It was the threshold. Because proof alone doesn't stop a determined abuser. It only works when you're willing to use it. And I was. I tried to do it the quiet way first, because even after everything, I still hoped we could avoid a war. The morning after I'd compiled the receipts, I sent him a carefully worded email titled, "Ray, road trip, request to postpone." I kept my tone neutral, almost apologetic. I've been having severe anxiety episodes, and my therapist strongly advised against long-distance travel right now. I think it's best we delay the trip until I'm more stable. I'll cover any non-refundable costs. I hit send and waited, hands folded in my lap, heart pounding not with fear this time, but with a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd take the off-ramp I'd offered. That he'd choose dignity over domination. He didn't. By noon, he was in my doorway, arms crossed, voice dripping with that familiar blend of disappointment and accusation. "You're canceling, after all the work I've done. People are counting on us. Your cousin's graduation party, my brother's barbecue, the hotel deposits I already paid." He didn't mention my anxiety, didn't ask how I was feeling, just framed my self-preservation as a betrayal of his convenience. And then came the kicker, the second pressure I hadn't seen coming but should have expected. That evening, my younger sister Maya slid into my room like a shadow, eyes red-rimmed, phone clutched in her trembling hand. "He told me," she whispered, voice cracking. "He said if you back out, I have to go with him instead, on the whole trip, alone." My blood turned to ice. Maya was 19, still living at home, still eating meals at his table, still vulnerable in a way I no longer was. He wasn't just punishing me. He was using her as leverage, dangling her safety as collateral to force my compliance. The cruelty of it was surgical. He knew I'd rather endure hell than put her in his crosshairs. For years, I'd shielded her, taken the brunt of his moods, deflected his criticisms, stayed quiet so she could fly under his radar. And now he was weaponizing that love against me. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running scenarios in my head. What if I went just to protect her? What if I stayed, and he took out his rage on her during the trip? The walls of my room, once a sanctuary, felt like they were closing in. My receipts were solid, my attorney ready, but none of that mattered if he could still control the narrative through Maya. I called Mrs. Langley at 2 a.m., voice barely above a whisper. "He's using her," I said, tears finally spilling over. "I can't let her go with him, not after what I saw." She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Then you stop negotiating, you activate." She reminded me of something I'd forgotten in my panic. This wasn't about convincing him anymore. It was about creating conditions where his choices had consequences, real, immediate, and public. My quiet strategy hadn't failed, it had just reached its limit. Reason only works when the other side respects truth, and he never had. So I stopped asking. I started acting. I texted my attorney, initiate the injunction and notify the bank. I messaged campus security to flag Maya's name in their emergency escort system, and I drafted a family group email, not pleading, not explaining, but statting, cold and clear. Due to documented concerns about safety, I am formally withdrawing from all shared travel and financial arrangements effective immediately. I didn't send it yet. I held it like a loaded chamber, waiting for the right moment. Because I knew now, the road trip wasn't the destination. It was the trap. And the only way out wasn't through politeness, it was through protocol. Quiet, lawful, and utterly unmovable. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was dressed in a simple navy blouse and slacks, clothes that said I belong here instead of I'm asking for mercy, and walking into the county clerk's office downtown. The air inside smelled of toner, old paper, and lemon-scented cleaner, the kind of sterile calm that makes everything feel official, even your panic. I approached the civil filings counter with my attorney's emergency motion in hand, along with a printed still from the Dashcam video showing the exact moment of impact, time-stamped and labeled. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense bun, scanned the documents, then looked up at me. "You understand this standby request means law enforcement can escort you from shared premises if you feel threatened?" I nodded. "Yes, and I need it served before noon." She didn't flinch. Just stamped the forms with a thud that echoed like a gavel and said, "Deputy's already been notified." From there, I drove straight to First Metro Bank, the same branch where my stepfather and I held our joint adventure fund account, opened 6 months ago under the pretense of teaching financial responsibility. In truth, it was another tether. Every withdrawal required both our signatures, every transaction visible to him in real time. But buried in the account agreement, on page 14 in tiny font, was a clause I'd circled weeks ago in red ink. In cases of verified duress or documented coercion, a co-owner may initiate a temporary freeze pending third-party review. I'd called ahead, spoken to the branch manager, and scheduled an appointment under the guise of reviewing travel expenses. Now, sitting across from her in a glass-walled office, I slid the police report, the dashcam still, and Mrs. Langley's notarized statement across the desk. The manager, her name tag read Denise, read everything twice. Then she looked me in the eye and said, "We'll freeze all withdrawals and transfers effective immediately. No notifications will be sent to the other account holder until the 72-hour review period concludes." Relief washed over me, quiet and deep. The $4,200 we'd saved for the trip, the money he thought would bind me to him, was now a locked vault. He couldn't spend it. He couldn't move it. And he wouldn't even know it was gone until he tried. But I wasn't done. While the bank processed the freeze, I opened my laptop in the lobby and logged into the forensic verification portal recommended by my attorney. I uploaded the original dashcam file, unedited, untrimmed, and initiated a chain of custody audit. Within hours, the system generated a certified integrity report. The file's creation date, GPS coordinates, device serial number, and hash value all matched the original installation records from Clearview Auto. Most importantly, it confirmed 0 alterations, no cuts, no splices, no digital tampering. This wasn't just my video. It was a forensically authenticated digital artifact, admissible in court, workplace reviews, even custody hearings. I downloaded the PDF, signed it with my digital certificate, and emailed it to my attorney, Mrs. Langley, and the HR compliance officer at my stepfather. Employer: a regional school district with a strict code of conduct for staff and their household members. By noon, the pieces were in motion. The sheriff's office confirmed the civil standby request was active. The bank sent me a confirmation code for the account freeze. The forensic report carried a digital seal that would hold up under scrutiny. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was orchestrating. Each receipt wasn't just evidence, it was a boundary made manifest. The dashcam had captured the violence, but these actions transformed that moment into something systemic, something structural, something he couldn't gaslight away. He might still hold power in our home, but outside it, in the world of records, institutions, and legal protocols, I was building a fortress. And he didn't even know the walls were going up. Yet, because the final step wasn't just about protection. It was about presence, and that required a room full of witnesses. So I sent a group text to the extended family. Please come to the house Saturday at 2 p.m. for a final trip meeting. Important updates to share. I didn't say what. I didn't have to. The receipts were ready, and so was I. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of oppressive summer heat that makes the air feel thick enough to chew. Cicadas buzzed in the oak trees, and the driveway shimmered with trapped warmth as aunts, uncles, and cousins began to arrive, some in linen shirts, others in flip-flops, all carrying iced tea and the easy assumption that this was just another pre-trip gathering. They milled about the living room, laughing over old photos on the coffee table, unaware that the house had become a courtroom in disguise. I arranged the space carefully. The TV mounted on the far wall, a single chair positioned in the center like a witness stand, and a printed agenda taped to the door. Trip review and safety protocol update. Just formal enough to signal this wasn't casual. My stepfather walked in last, tie slightly loose, holding a cooler like a peace offering. He gave me a tight smile, the kind that said, play along and this stays civil. I nodded back, heart steady now, hands cool despite the humidity. I wasn't playing. At exactly 2:07 p.m., once everyone was seated and the hum of small talk had settled, I stood. No dramatic pause, no trembling voice, just calm, clear intention. Thank you all for coming, I began. Before we talk logistics, there's something I need you to see. I pressed play on the remote. The TV screen flickered to life, not with maps or packing lists, but with the garage. The same sunlit space they just walked through, now rendered in stark, high-definition truth. The clip was only 47 seconds long, but it felt like an eternity. There was my voice. Small but steady. Can we skip Uncle Dale? I'm really not feeling well. Then his response, low and venomous. You don't get to change the plan. Then the shove, quick, brutal, efficient, and the sickening thud as my shoulder hit the cinder block wall. The video ended with me sliding down to the floor, one hand pressed to my ribs, the other fumbling for my phone. Sound was off, but I'd added white subtitles at the bottom for every word, clean and undeniable. The room didn't erupt. It imploded into silence. My aunt dropped her glass. It shattered on the hardwood unnoticed. My cousin stared at the floor like it might swallow her, and my stepfather, his face went still, then pale, then flushed with something between rage and panic. He stood abruptly. This is edited, it's taken out of context, he snapped, stepping toward the TV. But before he could reach it, my uncle, his own brother, the quiet one who always deferred to him, rose slowly from the couch and stepped into his path. We saw it, Rick, he said, voice low but firm. We saw what you did. It wasn't an accusation, it was a reckoning. And in that moment, the spell broke. The man who'd spent years crafting a narrative of stoic authority was suddenly exposed, not by a scream, not by a scandal, but by 30 seconds of silent, time-stamped truth. I didn't speak again right away. I let the footage hang in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Let them sit with the dissonance between the man they thought they knew and the man the camera caught. Because that's where real accountability begins, not in the act of showing, but in the act of being seen. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one who saw him clearly. The room was full of witnesses now, and none of them could unsee what they just watched. My stepfather sank back into his chair, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the door. But there was no escape. The truth was already out of the garage and into the light. After the Dashcam clip ended, the silence in the room didn't just linger. It thickened, heavy with disbelief, shame, and the dawning horror of complicity. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the cicadas outside seemed to hush. I let that silence do its work for a full 30 seconds, long enough for the image to sear into memory, long enough for denial to lose its footing. Then I walked to the side table, where a single manila envelope sat, crisp and unopened. I'd prepared it the night before with Mrs. Langley and my attorney, printed on legal letterhead, notarized, and sealed with a sense of finality that felt both terrifying and sacred. I wrote this with the help of a retired family court mediator and my legal counsel, I said, voice calm, level, betraying none of the tremor coiled in my ribs. It's not a negotiation, it's a boundary, and I'm reading it aloud so there's no confusion and no room for reinterpretation. I opened the envelope slowly, pulled out the letter, and began to read. Effective immediately, I withdraw all consent to share travel, residence, finances, or decision-making authority with Richard Hayes. I am formally terminating our joint adventure fund, account pending independent forensic audit. I am requesting that all shared digital access, Wi-Fi, cloud storage, location tracking, be revoked by end of day. I will not be participating in the planned road trip, nor will I be engaging in any further private communications outside the presence of a neutral third party. This is not punitive, it is protective, and it is non-negotiable. I paused, then added the final line, Grandma Ruth's words, the ones she'd whispered to me on her deathbed, now elevated to policy. My safety is not a favor to be granted. It is a condition of any relationship moving forward. As I read, I watched their faces shift. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth, my cousin's eyes filled with tears, and my stepfather sat rigid, his knuckles white around the armrest. But the real turning point came when I reached into my bag and handed a printed copy to every adult in the room, each one stamped with a control number, dated, and bearing a disclaimer. This document constitutes formal notice under civil protection protocols. Retaliation, or attempts to circumvent these terms, may result in legal escalation. Then I turned to my sister, who'd been sitting in the corner, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. I walked over, knelt beside her chair, and placed a copy in her lap, but this one was different. On the back, in my handwriting, I'd added, "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to, you're safe now." Her breath hitched. She looked up at me, eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in years, hope. The letter wasn't just words on paper. It was a legal shield, a psychological reset, and a public declaration all at once. And by reading it aloud, in front of the very people who'd excused, minimized, or ignored his behavior for years, I transformed private trauma into communal responsibility. No more secrets, no more family matters. The accountability wasn't mine to carry alone anymore. It belonged to all of them now. My stepfather finally spoke, voice tight. "You're making a huge mistake." I met his eyes, not with anger, not with fear, but with a quiet certainty that surprised even me. "No," I said, "I'm correcting one." And in that moment, the room didn't just witness truth. They became its keepers. The reversal didn't come with sirens or handcuffs. It arrived in quiet, bureaucratic waves, each one more devastating to his control than any courtroom drama could have been. By Monday morning, just 48 hours after the family meeting, the first domino fell. The local sheriff's office served formal notice that my civil standby request had been approved, granting me the legal right to have law enforcement escort me from any shared premises if I felt unsafe. The deputy who delivered the paperwork didn't speak much, just nodded, handed over the certified copy, and said, "You're covered now." Those 3 words carried more weight than any apology ever could. By Tuesday, the bank's 72-hour review concluded. The Joint Adventure Fund, account $4, 200 of my summer earnings and graduation gifts, was officially frozen. Not closed, not seized, but locked in procedural limbo pending an independent audit for coercive financial control, a term the branch manager now used without flinching. When my stepfather called the bank furious, demanding access, he was transferred to compliance, then legal, then told, politely but firmly, that without a court order overturning the duress claim, the freeze would remain. His access was revoked. His control severed, and the money, it wouldn't disappear. It would sit waiting until a neutral party could verify that no funds had been used to facilitate harm. That was justice, not vengeance, but verification. The third wave came from his workplace. Though he wasn't a teacher, he served on the Regional School Board's Facilities Committee, a volunteer role that required annual ethics training and background recertification. My attorney, with my permission, submitted a redacted version of the Dashcam footage and the forensic integrity report to the district's HR compliance officer, citing their policy on conduct unbecoming of a representative. Within 72 hours, they opened a formal investigation. Not because they could fire him, he was a volunteer, but because they couldn't afford the liability of someone with documented domestic aggression influencing school safety decisions. He was placed on administrative hold, barred from meetings, and required to undergo an independent behavioral assessment before any reinstatement. His reputation, the carefully curated image of the dependable, civic-minded man, began to crack, not with scandal, but with procedure. The most profound moment came during a brief call with my attorney on Wednesday afternoon. "The judge reviewed your filings," she said, voice crisp with satisfaction. "No hearing needed. The transfer on death clause in your mother's will, nomming you sole beneficiary of her personal assets, including the safe deposit box, was never legally contested. And given the new evidence of coercion, the court is expediting full release of those funds to you directly." I hadn't even known that box existed until Mrs. Langley mentioned it, but now it meant independence. Tuition covered, security deposit paid, a fresh start funded by my mother's foresight, not his permission. There was no gavel, no dramatic courtroom victory speech, just a series of quiet confirmations that the systems I'd feared were rigged against me were in fact built to protect people like me if you knew how to speak their language. And I had. Not with tears, not with rage, but with timestamps, affidavits, and chain of custody logs. The power hadn't shifted through force. It had shifted through documentation. And in that shift, I didn't just gain safety, I gained sovereignty. For the first time in a decade, my life was mine to direct, and no one, not even the man who tried to own it, could override that. The road trip was canceled, but my journey, it had finally begun. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was surgical, precise, almost disappointingly mundane, which made it all the more powerful. He didn't rage, he didn't threaten, he simply receded. Like a tide pulling back from a shore it no longer had the right to touch. Within a week he moved out of the family home, not because he was forced, but because the air had changed. The silence that greeted him at the dinner table wasn't respectful, it was watchful. The side glances weren't admiring, they were wary. His own brother stopped returning his calls. His reputation, once polished by years of performative generosity, now carried a quiet asterisk. "Did you hear what happened?" Legally, there were no arrests, because I never sought them. My goal wasn't punishment, it was separation. But consequences still came, not from me, but from the natural erosion of trust once truth takes root. His attempt to file a defamation suit against me was dismissed at the preliminary hearing when the judge reviewed the authenticated dashcam footage and my attorney submitted the bank's duress protocol documentation. "Plaintiff has provided no evidence of falsity," the ruling read, "only evidence of discomfort with verified facts." The legal fees from that failed motion came out of his own pocket, a small but satisfying irony. Financially, he was cut off from the joint account permanently. The bank's audit confirmed that over the past 6 months, he'd made 3 unauthorized transfers, small amounts, always just under the notification threshold, labeled as travel supplies, but paid to his personal credit card. Those funds were reversed and held in escrow. He tried to argue it was shared planning, but the timestamps showed the transactions occurred the same week he'd told me. "You're lucky I'm even funding this trip." The paper trail didn't lie. For my sister Maya, the change was immediate and profound. She stopped flinching when the phone rang. She started sleeping with her bedroom door open. And 2 weeks after he moved out, she came to me with a printed lease for a studio apartment near campus, her name alone on the dotted line. "I used my savings," she said, voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "And I told him I don't need his advice anymore." We signed it together at the leasing office, and when the manager handed her the keys, she clutched them like a talisman. As for me, I accessed my mother's safe deposit box. Inside, along with old photos and her wedding ring, was a letter addressed to me in her looping script. "If you're reading this, you found the courage I never had. Use this money to fly. Don't look back." The funds covered my first year of grad school, plus a security deposit on a ground-floor apartment with motion sensor lights and a deadbolt I installed myself. There were no dramatic confrontations in the end, no tearful apologies that rang hollow, just the slow, steady unraveling of a facade that had held for too long. And in its place, not emptiness, but space. Room to breathe, to trust my own instincts, to build a life where safety wasn't a privilege granted by someone else, but a baseline I enforced myself. The consequences weren't about destroying him. They were about dismantling the illusion that he ever had the right to control us. And in that dismantling, we were finally, quietly free. Months passed. Fall turned to winter, and the sharp edges of that summer began to soften, not because the harm was forgotten, but because the wound had finally scabbed over, protected by distance and due process. I'd settled into my new apartment, my graduate seminars, a rhythm of mornings with coffee and evenings with textbooks, the kind of ordinary peace I once thought was out of reach. Then, on a gray January afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox from his personal account, the one I'd long since muted. The subject line was blank. My finger hovered over the delete button. But curiosity, or perhaps the ghost of old conditioning, made me click. Eleanor, I've done a lot of thinking. I miss you. I miss our talks. I know things got complicated. I'd like to sit down, just us, and talk honestly. No anger, no blame, just a chance to understand each other again. Please, I'm not the monster you think I am. The words were careful, rehearsed, designed to sound humble but laced with the same old entitlement, the assumption that my forgiveness was his to request, that reconciliation was his right to demand. For a moment the old fear flickered. What if I'm being unfair? What if he really has changed? But then I remembered the garage, the frozen bank account, Maya's relieved sigh when she signed her own lease. And I knew, grace without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. I didn't block the email. I didn't ignore it. I answered, once clearly and with finality. I copied my attorney and Mrs. Langley before hitting send. If you retain a licensed family mediator approved by the State Conflict Resolution Board, and that mediator confirms in writing that they've reviewed the dashcam footage, police report, and civil standby order, I will consider a single, 1-hour in-person session at a neutral location with a security officer present. This is not an invitation to debate the past. It is not an opening for emotional appeals. It is a procedural option, should you choose to pursue healing through accountability, not through narrative control. No contact outside this channel will be acknowledged. Eleanor. I didn't send it out of hope. I sent it out of clarity, because true grace isn't blind. It sees the harm fully and still chooses whether, when, and how to engage. And in my case, that engagement would only happen on terms that honored my safety, my evidence, and my right to say no without guilt. He never responded. Maybe he couldn't meet the conditions. Maybe he didn't want to, and honestly, it didn't matter. The offer wasn't for him, it was for me. A final act of reclaiming power, not by shutting the door in rage, but by handing him a key with a lock only truth could open. I kept a printed copy of my reply in my journal, not as a threat, but as a reminder. I could be generous without being vulnerable, compassionate without being naive, and most importantly, I could offer a path forward without ever stepping back onto the road he'd tried to trap me on. That was the grace I'd earned, not forgiveness, but sovereignty, and I would guard it fiercely. Now the dashcam doesn't ride in a car anymore. It sits on my desk beside a small potted succulent and a framed photo of my mother, its lens covered with a tiny brass cap I bought at a flea market, the same warm, honeyed metal as the key Grandma Ruth once pressed into my palm. It's no longer a tool of surveillance, but a relic of survival. A quiet monument to the day I stopped waiting for someone to believe me and started building a case that wouldn't let them look away. The red recording light is off for good. Its work is done. Maya and I took our own road trip last October, just the two of us, in a rented hatchback with mismatched seat warmers and a playlist we built together over coffee one Sunday morning. We drove west, windows down, voices rising over the wind as we sang along to songs our mother used to play on long summer drives. We stopped at a roadside diner in Nebraska because the sign said best pie in 3 counties, and we ate slices of sour cherry so tart it made our eyes water, laughing like we hadn't in years. When we reached the Colorado foothills, we pulled over at a lookout point blanketed in golden aspen trees and just stood there, breathing in the crisp mountain air, no itinerary, no obligations, no man waiting in the driver's seat to decide when we moved on. The motif of the dashboard screen has come full circle, not as a passive witness, but as a symbol of agency. Back then, it recorded what was done to me. Now my life is the screen, and I'm the one choosing what appears on it. Morning runs through campus, late-night study sessions with friends who ask, "Are you okay?" and wait for the real answer, a therapist who helped me untangle years of "that's just how he is" from the truth of "that's abuse." I've learned that freedom isn't just physical distance. It's the quiet certainty that my no is enough, that my body belongs to me alone, that my time is mine to spend as I choose. The farmhouse of my childhood still stands, though I haven't returned. Maya says it feels different now, lighter, somehow even empty. But my home is here, in this small apartment with the fire escape I've lined with potted herbs, where I wake up each morning to birdsong and the hum of my own thoughts, uninterrupted. No footsteps in the hall. No voice calling my name with that familiar edge of expectation. Just peace earned, not given. And when I pass a car with a dashcam glinting behind the rearview mirror, I don't flinch anymore. I nod just slightly, like to an old friend who kept watch when no one else would. Because that little device didn't just capture violence, it captured the exact moment I chose myself. And from that frame forward, every decision has been mine to make, every mile mine to drive, every breath mine to take, deeply, fully, and without permission. If you've ever been told to let it go for the sake of the family, or he didn't mean it like that, or you're making a big deal out of nothing, this story was for you. Not because I wanted to expose one man, but because I needed to prove something to anyone who's ever sat in a room full of people who refused to see what was right in front of them. Your pain is valid, even when it's quiet. Your truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. And your safety is not negotiable, even if you have to document it, timestamp it, and serve it in a manila envelope to be believed. This wasn't revenge. Revenge demands suffering. What I sought and found was something far more powerful, lawful accountability paired with unshakable boundaries. I didn't need him to grovel. I didn't need a public takedown. I just needed him to no longer have access to my life. And that, it turns out, is entirely possible if you're willing to treat your trauma not as a secret to bury, but as evidence to preserve. So if this journey resonated with you, if it stirred a memory, a fear, or a flicker of hope, do this one small thing for yourself and for someone else who might be watching in silence. Type, "I see you" in the comments below. Not for me. For the woman scrolling at 2 a.m. wondering if she's overreacting. For the young person drafting an email they're too scared to send. For anyone who's been told their discomfort is drama when it's actually data. Your words might be the first mirror that reflects their truth back to them, and that can be the beginning of everything. And if you're asking, but how do I even start? I'm working on something for you. Next week, I'll be sharing a follow-up video with discreet, step-by-step guidance on securing digital evidence without escalating risk, including how to use cloud backups, metadata verification, and institutional protocols without tipping off an abuser. No jargon, no judgment, just practical tools, the kind I wish I'd had years ago. For now, know this: you don't have to be loud to be credible. You don't have to be perfect to be protected. And you don't have to forgive to be free. Sometimes, the most radical act of self-love is simply refusing to disappear and backing that refusal up with receipts. Stay safe, stay documented, and never underestimate the power of a quiet no backed by a folder full of truth.